Jamelle Lindo, check out my papers. Jamelle is an emotional intelligence leadership coach, trainer, and speaker with over 11 years of diverse learning and development experience. In his experience, he's worked with thousands of professionals across Canada to help them level up through the practical application of emotional intelligence and mindfulness-based strategies. Jamelle is certified in the world's leading assessment tool for measuring emotional intelligence, which is called the EQI, and it's on its second version. And he uses this to establish a scientifically valid benchmark to begin the self-development journey. Jamelle is also an official member of the Forbes Coaches Council, an invite-only organization for successful business coaches. And he's been published several times on Forbes.com, which is a great place to read, for various thought leadership pieces. Ultimately, Jamelle is driven by his mission to empower leaders and business professionals to become their best selves, and in so doing, achieve the kind of business success that makes the world a better place. Please welcome Jamelle.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with everybody right now. Just before I jump in, I just want to confirm, number one, that everyone can hear me crystal clear, and that also you can see me crystal clear as well. Beautiful, and it looks like you can. So, I mean, first off, before I jump in, the first thing that I want to say to everybody is congratulations for being here. Congratulations on your upcoming graduation for those who are graduating. I had an opportunity to take a quick look at the chat, and I found it incredible to see what some people are majoring in. We have biology, we have psychology, we have all of these different things that you guys have invested your lives to learn about. So it's very inspiring to me as a lifelong learner to get a little bit of insight into your own academic journey. And I also want to acknowledge the times that we're in, right? It's a really interesting time. It's a challenging time. We've never been here before as a society. And for many of us, this is the first time that we've experienced something that has had such an impact on our society. So I can imagine that for you, going through this at a time where you're looking to transition and find your way in the workforce obviously adds a lot more uncertainty to the situation than you would have had previously. And so I just want to acknowledge that that uncertainty is there and that uncertainty is in the air. In addition to that, I want to say, regardless of how things look right now, it's really important that we connect to and understand that this will pass, that we will transition through this, that there is another side to this. And if there's one thing that I'd like to share with you is that because of how radically we've been forced into this state, what's happening is the work environment is shifting a lot faster than it would have shifted originally. So things were, and I'm speaking also from a consultant as well who's working in the field. So things have already been shifting towards being digitized, towards things being less physical, towards online cloud information, virtual summits, webinars, things of that nature. We were already moving in that direction. But because we've had this isolation period, it has accelerated our movement towards a digital future and a digital workforce. So right now, it might feel like the opportunities are not there and that things are shutting down. But I challenge you to really start to look at how this is shaping the landscape of work, redefining the landscape of work, and causing the landscape of work to be able to evolve. And where there's evolution, where there is shift, where there is change, there is also a new opportunity. And those opportunities are the ones that didn't exist before. A lot of my clients right now are actually looking at very specific ways that they can transition their businesses, that they can make things more digital, that they can make things more accessible. They're looking at social media that they've never looked at before. So I want for you to remember, as you're transitioning to the workforce, they're really looking at new, innovative, exciting ways that they can reach their consumer, that they can reach the people that they are looking to connect with in order to be able to provide service. And if you can think of it from that perspective, then you start to engage with a different level of energy and enthusiasm around what this will mean as we transition through it, as opposed to being in fear about what this means. So I just wanted to preface it with that, because I know that there's a lot of tension. I know that there's a lot of pressure, but we have to realize that things are shifting, and with that will come a lot of opportunity, which is great for us especially being in that realm of technology. We're already so technologically driven. So anyways, I'll leave that there. I also want to make sure, guys, that I leave a lot of time at the end so that you can ask questions. I'm going to share a little bit about me. I'm going to share my story, my journey. I'm going to talk to you about emotional intelligence and why it has been likely the most critical skill in not only my success, but in the success of the people that I've worked with over the years, and specifically with the leaders that I work with now and the professionals that are in the workspace. And it's important to understand the journey, because I truly believe that what it is that we go through defines and shapes us. It makes us who we are, and it gives us a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. And when we understand ourselves at a deeper level, if we can look at our past and we can draw these parallels into the things that drive us and motivate us and contribute to our core values and who it is that we genuinely want to be in the world, we can operate from a more powerful place. And I would say absolutely 100% that that's what happened to me. I mean, if you were to ask me, I would have to say that this journey likely started about, 10, 15 years ago. And if you were to ask me then, Jamelle, do you think that you will be coaching leaders and professionals in emotional intelligence? The answer would absolutely be no. I could not have seen this coming. This is not something that I planned. I didn't sit down and write out a map for my future and say, this is exactly where I'm going to go. Although sometimes it happens like that and you move towards a plan and it works out. Other times, what you'll find is that the plan that you've set out for yourself opens you up to a journey of self-exploration. And it ends up being about you learning who it is that you are. And the deeper that you can learn and the more refined you become in that learning of who you are, is the more powerful your decisions become. And ultimately, those decisions oftentimes are career decisions, and they determine where we end up in our lives over the course of our lives. The other piece to that, of course, being that you may shift careers. The average person shifts careers 4 or 5 times over the course of their lifetime. So we also want to recognize that nothing is set in stone, and that as we embark on this journey, we are going to learn about the world. We're going to learn about the workforce. We're going to learn about all of these things that are going to change us and change our minds and change our direction. And that is completely okay as well. And that is 100% a part of the process. And so for me, this journey of self-development and self-awareness really took me completely by surprise. The first time that I was exposed to these ideas, I remember I was in high school at the time, just finishing high school, and I was working at Best Buy. I was doing returns there, customer service, all of that kind of thing. And I went in to do one of my shifts, and one of my coworkers was so excited to see me that he literally ran up to me right at the front of the store. He stopped, he was out of breath. He said, "Jamelle, you have to read this book." And I said, "Okay, you seem really excited." He wasn't very animated to begin with. So I was thinking, well, what's going on? What is the big deal about this book? And I said, well, why do I have to read it? And he said, "Jamelle, you have to read this book. It's literally, it's changed my life." And so I was very shocked to see him expressing himself in this way, because he was normally a very calm, cool, laid back kind of guy. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe I'll give it a shot. And it's really interesting because growing up, I was never a heavy academic. I think I read a lot more now than I ever did back then. But at that time, I wasn't very much into that. It just wasn't my jam. I wasn't totally engaged in that way, although I love to learn. And I started to get this weird inclination to read. It just came out of the blue, out of nowhere. And this happened, by the way, after I graduated. So a little too late if you ask me, but it's all good because that's why I'm here today. And then he comes to me and he says, "You have to read this book." I say, "Fantastic. I've had it on my mind to read something recently, so I figure I'll give it a shot." And I said, "So what's the name of the book?" And he said, "The name of the book is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle." And I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Eckhart Tolle or some of his work, but he has some phenomenal work around understanding yourself and self-awareness and personal development. And so I went home, and on the way home, I picked up that book, When I got home, I started reading it. As soon as I started reading it, I was glued. I was stuck. I could not put the book down. And remember, I was not really an academic person. So for me to sit down and read for an extended period of time, believe it or not, was outside of the norm. And I know that you're probably listening to me thinking about all your late night study sessions like lucky you, right? And as I'm reading this book, I eventually stumble upon the sentence that shifts and changes everything for me. This is the moment that it all began. This was my epiphany moment. This was my breakthrough moment. And it has literally led to me doing everything that I've done so far in my professional entrepreneurial journey, but it's also led to me having this conversation with you right now. And the sentence that I read is, "You are not your thoughts." It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to read it again, actually. And so I went back and read that again. You are not your thoughts. And in that moment, I felt like time had stopped. I had this moment of self-reflection like I've never had before, because it had never been suggested to me by anyone up until that point that the things that I was thinking, the things that I was telling myself every single day, was not necessarily who I was not necessarily my identity. This was an important realization for me because the things that I was telling myself at that time were not positive things. I remember my mind was so busy. There were so many thoughts that were racing through at all times. And a lot of it was negative stories about myself. A lot of it was negative stories about the people around me. A lot of it was negative stories about the world that I lived in and my environment. And so for the first time ever, I gained insight into my very own thinking process. Now, we need to think about that for a minute because it's not something that we talk about frequently. But the reality is that most of us, at any given point of the day, we are consumed by our thinking processes. They say that the average person has roughly 75,000 thoughts per day, rushing in and out. And we're so consumed by what we are thinking, and we believe everything that we think. So for me to read this statement, "You are not your thoughts," it gave me insight. It was almost like I was able to take a step back and then perceive what I was thinking for the first time ever, instead of being so consumed by it that I didn't even really know that it was happening. And what I noticed was every negative thought that I was having was then creating a corresponding emotion. So in other words, if I were to tell myself something like, "You're not good enough," or "You're not capable," or "You're not smart enough," all of those stories then created these emotions that were related to those stories. So these would be emotions of anxiety, of fear, of inadequacy. And for the very first time in my life, I was able to make the connection between what I was thinking and what I was feeling. And then what I realized is that what I was feeling, so those emotions that I had, were then contributing to the actions that I was taking in my life. It was contributing to whether or not I would say yes to an opportunity, say no to an opportunity, whether I would approach the girl that I liked or didn't approach the girl that I liked, whether I would apply for the job that I wanted or didn't apply for the job that I wanted. And I saw this link and this connection between my emotions, what I was feeling, and what I was doing. And the more that I started to observe is the more that I started to realize that my internal experience, so my thoughts and my emotions, were in many ways informing my external experience, the way that I would communicate with people, the way that I would build relationships, what I would get in those relationships or not get. The things that I would get, the outcomes that I had in my life were all in some way, shape, or form connected to me. And this, to me, was completely groundbreaking. You see, because I had stumbled onto what I believed and still do believe today was the single most important realization that a human being can have. And that's essentially that you are not as simple and as one-dimensional as you think. you're a little bit more complicated than that. And you have a thinking process that's happening all the time that's informing a feeling process, which is informing what you're doing, which is informing what you're getting. And as I came to this realization, it all kind of just, the gears just started to spin for me and I kept reading, and it gave me more and more information and insight into this. And of course, I tested that against my own experience. It had to become a real practice for me. As this process started to happen, and when I made that realization reading that book, I had actually a sense of disappointment in me. And the reason why I was disappointed is because up until that moment, I had been to church, I had been, counseled, parented, coached on a variety of different teams. I'd had all this exposure out there in the community, and never once did anybody ever even insinuate or ask me, Jamelle, have you ever paid attention to your thoughts? Jamelle, have you ever paid attention to your emotions? Jamelle, have you ever thought about how your thoughts and emotions dictate what you do and the way that you show up? Have you ever looked at any of those things? And the most important one was, Jamelle, have you realized or have you noticed that the things that you're thinking are not necessarily who you are? They are not necessarily your identity. You can shift them. You can change them. And to me, I figured it's amazing that I haven't come across this information, but yet I'm lucky to have stumbled across it. And the reason why is because things like, and I'll get into a more official definition of emotional intelligence and all of that later on in the story, but what's important to know right now is that these are not things that are part of the mainstream conversation. And especially 10, 15 years ago, they were not as popular as they are now. Now they're starting to become more popular, but even still, if we were to ask ourselves, when was the last time that I went to or went through some kind of formalized education process so that I could understand myself, who I am, what my emotions are telling me, how to navigate that, what my thoughts are telling me, how to navigate that. And so right now, where we are in society, there aren't any formalized approaches to that. What we do have is we have other formalized approaches in education that really help us to be able to flourish on an intellectual level. And so we learn how to read, we learn how to write, we get all of this amazing information about the world. We learn about all of these different theories, we learn about math, we learn about cells, all of these kinds of things. There is psychology, so we do get an opportunity to touch on it, but it doesn't become experiential, and I'll talk about what I mean by that as I transition. So we get access to all of this information, and so we become very educated in that way. And so if we went over to Africa, or we went over to any third world country, and we were to ask or do a survey on how many people could read, write, or tell us about some of the things we learned about here, we would find that many of them can't. In fact, many of them can't even read and write. And so a lot of them are illiterate, but if you come over here, not only are we literate, but we're also educated. And the difference is a formalized system and process that has empowered us to be literate, to be able to read, write, count, and all of that. And so I had to understand in that moment that I was living in a society that hadn't yet invested as much in helping people become emotionally literate, which basically means that you have a certain level of understanding and insight into the emotions, not just the emotions of yourself, but also the emotions of other people. And when I approached it through that lens, I realized that it was a gap. And at that point, I knew that there was something that I wanted to do to be able to help it and support that. But more importantly than that, I wanted to live it first. I wanted to understand what it meant. What is self-awareness, right? What is emotional intelligence? What does it mean? How do I live it? How do I practice it myself? And so I started to do that. And as I started to practice it, I realized that things were changing because I was able to slowly start to change the stories that I was thinking in my mind. And as I started to change them and they became more positive, I then started to feel more positive emotions. As I started to change the stories and the beliefs that I had about myself, which, like I was saying at the time, were very negative beliefs, then I started to feel better about myself and who I was. My self-esteem started to increase. It started to enhance my confidence, my sense of self-worth. And to give you some insight, when I started this journey, I was just like any other high school kid. I was generally happy. I wouldn't say that I was going through any significant depression, but I definitely had a lot of anxiety. I definitely had a lot of negative feelings about myself and other people. I definitely had a lot of insecurities, a lot of uncertainty about myself and who I was. I remember at times going to parties, or even sometimes just seeing someone in the hallway could instigate this crazy feeling of social anxiety. Something as simple as that. I remember playing on both my high school and football team and being so insecure about my skill, even though I was good enough to make the team and usually the starting lineup, that I wouldn't want to take the shot. I wouldn't want to take the risk because I was so crushed by the fear of failure. And of course, that comes from a sense of insecurity. So for the first time ever in my life, I started to have this sense of self-empowerment because I was learning about who I was through the analysis of my own mind, my own thoughts, my own stories, and my own emotions. And I started to play an active role in my thinking and my feeling process, which is truly the foundation of everything that I'm going to be sharing with you guys in a minute. Now, at the time, I didn't know that this was called emotional intelligence or mindfulness or any of those things. I was just on a journey where for the first time I was getting to know myself and I was feeling more and more empowered each day that I was practicing these processes. And because I was getting so many results, it was very motivating for me. And that was really the birthplace and the beginning of this process. So it wasn't too long after that where, you know, first off, I did go back and I thank that gentleman for introducing me to that book. I knew that it was a life-changing book. An interesting story, I ran into him not too many years ago at Square One Mall in Mississauga, and I tried to tell him about how life-changing it was, and he was not nearly as excited as when he told me. So I don't know what was happening there, but all good. So I transitioned from Best Buy. I took an unconventional route. I told myself, as many people do, you know, I'm going to go and get some work experience. And then after I go and get some work experience, then I'm going to go back to post-secondary. And so I went in not expecting to stay as long as I did. And that kind of changed the trajectory of everything, because it wasn't until much later on where I'd go back and become certified for what I did and all of that kind of stuff. So I started working at one of Canada's largest telecommunications companies, just in an entry-level role. And for those of you who are out there, I highly recommend looking at an entry-level role and understanding that that's really where you're going to be able to learn, grow, understand things, understand yourself, get a feel for the workforce. So an entry-level role is a phenomenal thing. It is a great thing. I don't want for anybody to go into the workforce thinking that they have to start as CEO, right? Go in looking to learn and explore. And that was really the journey that I took. Things accelerated rather quickly for me. Within the first 6 months, I was able to secure my first leadership role. And this was essentially right out of high school. So it was a very interesting time, and things moved really, really quickly for me. And now when I take a moment and I think back and reflect on what some of those key things were that allowed me to transition, what's interesting is it wasn't necessarily my technical knowledge and expertise. Those things are important and you need to be able to do the job. But what really helped me was my ability to be able to build relationships, communicate effectively, and be clear about what it is that I wanted to do, and to create a streamlined conversation that would continuously come back to what my goals were and what it is that I wanted to accomplish. tying into some of the key relationships and people that could help me to achieve those goals. Really leaning into those relationships, being vulnerable, asking questions, being open to learning are some of the key things that set me up so that when that opportunity came, I was positioned as one of the people that should be stepping into that role, regardless of my tenure. I was only there for 6 months at the time. And so I transitioned into that junior leadership role. From there, I had an opportunity to transition into different leadership roles, to different capacities in different parts of the business, so different departments. I was able to do sales. I was able to do the technical side of things, which was troubleshooting. I was able to do the customer care, customer service side of things, which again deals with your ability to be able to speak to people and have conversations, and oftentimes have difficult conversations with people who are not happy. And every time that I had an opportunity to do that, I allowed it to challenge me to develop my communication skills and my ability to be able to diffuse difficult, challenging people and scenarios, and to find solutions in the midst of all of that. So I didn't really think of it at the time, but those were all of the skills that I was developing on my journey. And so as you step into the workforce, you want to be thinking about, what is this job challenging me to do in this moment? And how can I grow, develop, and become better? Like I said, I started as a call center representative. That was the entry-level role. And so my challenge in those moments was, how can I communicate more clearly? How can I position things in my communication from a sales perspective to make things more appealing? How can I lean into understanding the customer, what their needs are, what their desires are, what their wants are, so that when I'm positioning things to them, it makes sense to them? There's a desire there. All of that is sales, interpersonal, empathy. There's a social element there, a social awareness element there that I decided that I would build. And I took that with me into the various leadership roles. And there are quite a bit of experiences there, but the one that I really want to focus and hone in on is the HR training specialist role. And the reason why I'd like to pause and spend a little bit of time here is because many of us, when we go into the workforce, what's going to happen is you're going to go through a training process, and then that will transition you into whatever role you're looking to do. And I had the opportunity to train, I would say, thousands of people across Canada. Closer to the end of my stint, I was even doing virtual training with classes. And these were people who were still studying part-time, right? Like some of you may be, who were slowly starting to transition into the workforce. So when I was in that role, which is a part of human resources within that organization, it gave me an opportunity to see things from different perspectives. And one of the key insights that I got is what we look at when we're doing hiring. When you go in to do a job interview, likely you're going to be thinking that it's all about putting forward all of the information that you know and basically being able to canvas that. And in some instance it is. But what we were looking for mostly when we were hiring is, who is this person fundamentally? What matters to them? What are their core values? What drives them? What motivates them? How are they going to deal with conflict? How are they going to deal with challenging situations? How are they going to show up in a moment of failure? What happens when things go wrong? Will they be able to deal with that? Will they be able to absorb it? Will they be able to learn? Or are they going to go into a state where they start blaming and victimizing and becoming negative about an experience that could be a learning experience that takes them to the next level? These are the things that we were looking for in the hiring process. Most of the technical information that you need in order to do the job, you're going to learn in training, the majority of it, right? And of course, you have to demonstrate some level of competency. And when I was training classes, I would absolutely look for some level of technical competency. You need to understand the material. You need to be able to navigate through the different systems or whatever the case may be. All of that is important. And those things are typically more associated with job knowledge, right? It can be associated also with education, right? And it can also be associated with IQ. However, what we need to understand is that those are entry-level skills. Those are what we call threshold skills. They only open the door and allow you to step into the room. Once you're in the room, now the question becomes, what makes you different from the person beside you and the person beside them? If all of you have gone through the same training, and all of you have basically learned the same content, the same information, the same material, and you've tested generally well, what then becomes the differentiating factor? How do I know who to promote, who not to promote? How do I know who to move into this position, who not to move into that position? How do I know who has leadership potential? How do I know who's going to be working effectively in a team? And so when we start to ask these questions, which are more about the human being, it's the people element, the people aspect, now we're having a conversation around emotional intelligence. Now we're having a conversation around social intelligence. Now we're having a conversation around self-awareness. So what do these things really mean? Now, it depends on where you look and where you go, because there are different models and there are different definitions of what emotional intelligence is. Now, I use a model called EQI 2.0. It's developed by a company called MHS. They're a world-leading publisher of psychometric tools, which are basically tools that you can use to measure where someone stands psychologically. And you can use it to measure someone's emotional skills. So that's the model that I use. And in that model, there are 5 different areas of emotional intelligence, okay? The first one is self-awareness. Self-awareness is really your ability to be able to assess what you're thinking and feeling at any given moment and to be able to manage it proactively. So if you're upset, can you identify that? And if you can identify it, can you manage it so that that emotion does not get in your way? It doesn't prevent you from being able to do what you need to do. An example that might ring true for you guys is when you're about to write an exam, you're gonna notice that, and I had a question here. Somebody said, what was the system called that I mentioned? The tool that I use is called EQI 2.0. I'll show it to you guys at the end of the call. So to give you a real life example, when you go in to write an exam, you're gonna notice what? All of these emotions are gonna be coming up. It's gonna be that anxiety and that fear and that frustration and that self-doubt. So self-awareness is, can you recognize and see those emotions? If you can see them, do you know what you're thinking that's causing you to feel those emotions? Yes, EQI 2.0. And the last thing is, can you then manage it and do something about it? A really simple example. And it really is much more complex than this. But in a moment like that, someone who is self-aware might say, I'm gonna watch my favorite comedy show before my exam. And I know that that's gonna get me in a positive state, and it's gonna help me to loosen up so that I really have access to everything that I've studied over the course of the last few days, or maybe the last few hours. I don't know how productive and proactive you are. We'll have to see. And so that's self-awareness. The next one is interpersonal. Interpersonal is your ability to be able to build meaningful relationships with other people. It's how insightful you are into what other people might be feeling and thinking, and it's your ability to be able to adapt your communication based on that. This also is connected to your social intelligence. So when you're in a room full of people, do you have an ability to navigate that room, to speak to people, to have the right kinds of conversations? This is going to apply to you guys on the working side in terms of networking. So if you're at an event where you could potentially meet an employer, right? Or you could meet someone who may be able to give you an opportunity or an avenue in to where it is that you want to go, are you able to have those conversations in a meaningful way in a social setting? So it touches a little bit on that. The next one is decision-making. So decision-making is just your ability to be able to make the best kinds of decisions when emotions are involved. The next one after that is stress management. So how do we deal with times that are very stressful? This is a big conversation right now in leadership development. Everybody wants to know, how do we build and develop resilience? The next one after that is self-expression. So do I have an ability to not only identify how I'm feeling, but to be able to express it? right? And those are the 5 components of emotional intelligence. If I were to simplify all of that into one single definition, I would say that emotional intelligence is your ability to be smart about emotions. And not just your emotions, but the emotions of other people. And I'm simplifying it because it's a big thing, but when you make it that small, it makes it much easier for us to be able to understand. So coming back to, and what I'll do, guys, is I'll come back to these questions at the end. I see a bunch of questions coming up, and I want to make sure that I give you guys as much as I possibly can. So coming back to training new hires, these are some of the skills that made the difference between the people that would come in and maybe come and go versus the ones that would stay and do well and succeed and thrive in the work environment. And oftentimes, a lot of the people that were coming in were new hires. They were students just like you guys. And I would always notice that there was this gap in this particular area. And it was a struggle for students to make that transition, because in our academic lives, there's a huge emphasis on the memorization of facts and numbers and content, which is important, and that will serve you very well. It's a skill that we must have, the ability to be able to work on projects, to plan time, to memorize key important information and facts is so important. But what would happen is when they would transition into a work environment, they believed that those skills were the only important skills. And so they would focus on that, and they would write an assessment, and oftentimes they would do great on the workplace assessment in training. But they were missing the right attitude. They weren't able to deal with conflict well. They weren't able to receive feedback in a positive and constructive way. There were all of these things on the EQ side that were holding back their potential and their success. So this is where I started to have more conversations around what emotional intelligence is and why it's so important to our success. And those conversations, of course, would help for people to be able to make some of those connections. But the fundamental thing that I had to share with students in the class is, look, and I've been in this situation many times, there are going to be moments, and I've had moments, where we've had people score phenomenally on assessments. I mean 99, I mean 100, I mean perfect. And those people were not actually successful in transitioning through training because some of the other key pieces were not in place. On the contrary, I've had people that scored not the greatest on their assessments, but they had this drive, they had this willingness to learn, they had this positivity about them, they had an optimism, they had a certain social awareness, they were building relationships, they were getting out there, they were exploring, and they had this deep desire to do well. And there have been people in that space who've actually gone on to be very successful despite their lower scores, test assessment scores in training. So once you start to understand that it's not just one thing, that it's the combination of these two things that's going to contribute to your success, that's really when you begin to transition. That's really when you begin to put both things together so that they can work harmoniously. And my whole intention in what I do is to bring forward that emotional intelligence piece, is to bring forward that self-awareness piece, to give people that understanding so that they can be more empowered when they jump into the workforce. And this is not something that's only going to be significant at the very beginning of your work career, but it becomes increasingly more significant as you move into leadership roles and as you become responsible for other people. Now, that may or may not be your intention, but if it is your intention at some point to have a leadership role and to have that kind of experience, then it's key to recognize that emotional intelligence will be your gateway in. Now, if you want to know more about, if you want to really dive into what emotional intelligence is, I highly recommend, and please write this down, we can talk about it later, that you read a book. It's called Emotional Intelligence, and the author is Daniel Goleman. So Daniel Goleman, he is the front runner of emotional intelligence. He popularized the idea and brought it into the mainstream of leadership development. So if you want to learn more about how to get started on the journey, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you get started there. And so when we talk about emotional intelligence and leadership, that's really where we talk about being an influence. It's really where we talk about being impactful, being able to mobilize and motivate people to do the best that they can possibly do. This is the crux of what leadership really is. And it's not possible for us to be able to do that if we're not in tune with our emotions, or we're not in tune with the emotions of other people. Why is that? Well, it's because fundamentally emotions drive who it is that we are. And this is what I would then learn to discover as I progressed through my journey in leadership. And as a leader myself, I had leaders that were great, but then I had leaders that were really ineffective, that weren't so great at what they did. And that's where I started asking questions. What was the difference between a leader who was really effective and who drove me and who motivated me and I felt valued by and I wanted to perform for, and the leaders who were demotivating, that didn't make me feel valued, that didn't make me feel energized and excited like I wanted to step up and perform and give my best. And that's really where I started to get introduced to the framework that I'm sharing with you guys right now, which is emotional intelligence. And I loved it. And I loved it so much that I started to incorporate it into everything that I was doing. I started to put a little bit here into coaching. I started to put a little bit there into training. I was able to do a variety of different training programs across Canada. And this is when I was working, like I was saying, for that organization, which gave me an opportunity to experiment a little bit more. And what was interesting was, I remember the first time I did probably 20 minutes or so of emotional intelligence with my mentor at the time, who's now a very, very good friend of mine. And the following day, one of the students came to me and said, Jamelle, I just want you to know that what you shared about emotional intelligence just now with the class yesterday, it not only helped me in my role, but I went home and I had a conversation with my wife like I've never had. And we've been married for 20 years. And I said to myself, oh my goodness, that's amazing. That's insane. That's kind of crazy. I can't believe that it had that kind of an impact. And so I thought that it was just a one-off thing. But I kept getting people coming to me after class, sharing these kinds of stories. And so what I saw is that this wasn't just impacting the way that people were able to do their jobs, but it was impacting the way that they were showing up on a personal level. And I realized that that was significant. And the more that I did is the more people wanted. And so I started with that 20 minutes, which then became 30 minutes, which then became, 45 minutes. But I was coming across different barriers. And the first barrier is that I always had to make sure that I tied the emotional intelligence lesson back to their role and what it is they were looking to accomplish, but also that I couldn't do much more of the emotional intelligence stuff without compromising the very program that I was there to be able to teach. And of course, the leaders of the organization knew that I was doing this, but I also had other content that I had to get to as well. And I started to feel a bit of a tension there, because on the one end, there were people that wanted to learn more. They wanted to do more of this, and there was such a hunger, and I was capped as far as how much I could give. And this is where I made the choice years back to jump full-fledged into entrepreneurship and really push this and really go all the way. This is where I went back. I became, certified as an associate certified coach of the International Coach Federation. I did some other work to become certified as a trainer, and then more recently to become certified to administer an emotional intelligence assessment that basically measures where you stand across all of the emotional intelligence skills, which would be the baseline for coaching and developing leaders. And so jumping into entrepreneurship full-fledged was terrifying. It was horrifying. It was energizing. It was such an incredible experience, and it challenged me like nothing has ever challenged me in my life. It's very, very, very difficult, especially at the beginning before things start to come together and before your business really starts to make sense. And I realized in hindsight that what allowed me to be able to ride the waves of those challenges and those difficulties was the emotional intelligence work that I was doing. It was the self-awareness. It was an ability to be able to manage my emotions, my stress levels, to find a midpoint, to find a middle ground. And you'll always hear when people talk about entrepreneurship, that it's all about the mindset, right? It's about your mindset. That's what determines success when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And that couldn't be any closer to the truth. It's about your mindset, how you manage yourself, which also includes, of course, how you manage your emotions. I'm super excited for my journey and the unconventional path that I decided to take. I didn't expect to be in a position where I am now. I get an opportunity to speak to wonderful students like you guys that have futures that are, you know, fully open to you because you've spent the time to invest and to educate yourselves, which is just such a beautiful thing. And now the world is your oyster. I didn't think I'd have an opportunity to do this. I didn't think that I would be traveling across Canada, talking to different leaders in various positions about how they can become better at what they do and how they can step into their greatness through applying emotional intelligence tools and strategies and techniques. I didn't believe that I'd be writing for Forbes.com about some of my experiences with leadership development. I didn't think that I'd be able to do any of these things. But what I did keep in mind throughout my entire journey are a few simple things that I'll share with you before we kind of transition to Q&A. The first thing is really checking in with myself at any given moment to ask, Jamelle, what is driving you right now? What are your core values? What matters to you? That's foundational. The second thing is the self-awareness around, Jamelle, what is it that you're feeling at this moment? What are some of the emotions at play, and why are you feeling some of those emotions? Are they helping you to move towards your goal, or are they blocking you from getting towards your goal? And doing the work to figure out what's really happening on an emotional level. The next thing is mindset and understanding your thoughts. So what are some of the things that I'm thinking? What is my mindset? Are these thoughts and ideas helping me? Are they contributing to my success? Do I need to reframe? Do I need to challenge? Do I need to apply some critical thinking to my own thought process to get to the core of what's really happening with me? And the most important thing for me is, am I being an individual? Am I making decisions that are truly rooted in what I value in life? And I believe that that one has truly been the most important for me, because no matter what, whether things work or whether things don't work, to be able to look back and say that the decisions that I made were always based on what I felt was right for me in the direction in my life at that time is critical. To be able to say that undoubtedly helps me to be able to come to terms with virtually any outcome. And so for you, as you step into the workforce, I'd like to leave a few things with you. The first thing is to ask yourself, what is it that is driving and motivating you? Where do your interests lie? Also ask, how can you develop? How can you grow? How can you learn as an individual throughout the process of employment? And always look for the thing that you can take out that makes you a better version of yourself. Because ultimately, no matter which way you go, the one thing that will never change is that you will always be who you are. And that person will follow you for the rest of your life. And as long as you're moving the needle and improving or developing in some way, shape, or form as that individual, you will always have an asset to bring forward to any organization. And that's really what I would like to leave with you today. I hope that you found that talk and my story valuable. I'd like to open up, hopefully we have time for a little bit of Q&A. I know that some of you wanted to learn a little bit more about the emotional intelligence model and all of that. Please, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just opening up the webinar chat here. If there were some questions that you guys had throughout, please share them with me here, and I can address them with you.
Thank you so much, Jamelle. So we were trying to direct questions to the Q&A. Are you able to see the Q&A box?
I can. I have it open right here in front of me, yes.
Fabulous. So some were answered because we were saying, Jamelle, we'll get to that. So can you see both open and answered as tabs at the top of the screen?
I see the chat, but I don't see that section there. Oh yeah, I do see that. Yes, answered.
Perfect. So when we answered, we were just saying, Jamelle, we'll get to that. So please do drop in both boxes.
Okay, fantastic. So let me just power through these. And how much time do I have left here, Jen?
We promised people a break around 11:40, but I'm sure if we went to 11:45, if you don't mind, I don't think folks will mind.
Okay. All right, so let's jump in. So Antania Bonomo, please do not fault me if I've messed that up. My intentions are pure. So would you be able to repeat the 5 beneficial emotional intelligence quality that employers value? So the most important emotional intelligence quality is self-awareness. That is the most important one because it acts as the gateway to all of the other emotional intelligence skills. In the model that I use, there are 15 emotional intelligence skills in total. What I can actually do with you really quickly is I will actually share my screen with you so that you guys can see what some of this stuff actually looks like. So give me a quick minute here. We will prop it up. And there you go. So what I spoke to you guys about was the 5, right? So the self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal decision-making, and stress management. But each of these has 3 skills within them. This model, like I said, is created by MHS, Multi-Health Systems. If you're looking to develop your self-awareness, the first thing that you have to recognize is it's a lot more challenging than most people believe. So the most effective way to do it is to have the support of a coach or someone who's trained in this model. It doesn't have to be me, it can be anybody. But that's the best way to do it because when you're doing self-awareness work, you're tapping into areas and elements of yourself that are not known to you. So when you have a third party who can help you to identify some of the things that you're not able to see, it becomes very insightful. So that's the best way to start improving your emotional intelligence. Some other simple things that you can do are psychometric assessments, right? So you can look at this one here to get a feel for where you are in each of these categories. There are other assessments that are unrelated. Things like Strengths Finder is a great way to identify some strengths and also enhance your self-awareness. It'll give you a baseline so you can see where you stand now and where your areas for development are. So that's the best way. The other way that you can do it is you can start your own practice of self-reflection. What does that mean? It means literally starting a journal, a reflection that helps you to identify throughout the day, number 1, what are my trigger moments? What are the moments where I'm getting triggered emotionally, right? The second thing you write down after the trigger moment is what is the emotion that came up? Literally label the emotion. Write out what it was. Is it guilt? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it frustration? The next thing you write down is the corresponding thought. So what are the things that you were thinking that caused you to feel that way? Having a coach to help you work through that process is going to be most effective, but it's still something that you can at least start to do alone so that you begin reflecting internally. And that's what most of us don't do. We're not conditioned like that. We're not taught how to do it. So those are some really simple ways that you can get started on the self-awareness journey. And then also the book that I recommended was Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence. So the next one, how do you get motivated to carry on tasks and be more aware of your thoughts? Because sometimes it can be overwhelming. Now, the overwhelm really comes from a place of already having too much happening mentally and emotionally. So now we're overwhelmed, which means we're on the end of that experience. We're catching on late if I'm already overwhelmed. Now, if you can start the practice of just reflecting on how you're feeling at any given moment, then you can catch where you are emotionally, oftentimes before you get overwhelmed. And what that allows you to do is that awareness gives you the opportunity to then be able to make different choices, right? You can make different choices and do different things. Because if you're sitting there and you're overwhelmed, you might need to take a moment. You might need to take a breather. You might need to take a break. All of these things are going to help you to regulate your emotions so that you're not getting to the stage of burnout and then burning out, and then now you have to recover. So again, it's about using some of the practical strategies that I was just sharing around self-awareness. Literally write it out and build a habit of reflecting on what you're experiencing at any given moment. It sounds so simple that it almost feels like it can't be the thing that works, but it is the thing that works. I've worked with hundreds of people across Canada, and this simple strategy is the gateway that leads us into getting into some more complex strategies. I have noticed that people usually need a little bit of help at the very beginning with it, because we are usually so unaware of where we are emotionally. It can be tough to nail things down. But if you can work through that, you'll see that it becomes easier as you go. All right, so we'll just say that that one is good. How do you drive away negative thoughts? Okay, that's a really great question. So the first thing is, you don't start by driving them away. You start by recognizing that they're there to begin with. Once you're aware of your negative thoughts, then you can challenge them. So an example is, if I'm about to write an exam and I'm having all of these negative thoughts that say, you're not smart enough, you can't do it, you're not good enough, you didn't study enough, you're stupid. We tend to speak to ourselves very negatively, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed this, but this is the habit for most of us. So if you're having these kinds of thoughts, before you want to think about driving them away, you need to first be able to just identify them and say to yourself, wow, I am engaging in some very negative thinking right now. Write the thoughts down. Literally write them down. What are the negative thoughts? Get them out of your head onto paper, right? Now that you're seeing them and they're very implicit to you, right, or explicit to you, now you can start to question them. Oh, well, here's a negative thought I wrote down. It said that I'm not capable of passing this assessment. Now you can challenge that. Well, is that true? Well, I don't think that it's true, because I just spent the last 5 days studying 2 hours every single day for this assessment, and I did a test assessment and I did exceptionally well. And when I ask my prof what's going to be on the assessment and I go over that content, I notice that I know that content quite well. So this idea can't be true. And if it's not true, then what would I rather replace that thought with? Well, I can replace that thought with, I am capable, I do know this information, because the reality is that I studied and I demonstrated that. So to answer the question, the first thing is you need to be aware of the thought. Writing it down is going to be very, very helpful. And then the second thing is you want to challenge the thought. Is it true? Is it real? Is it a fact? Put it against the test. And then from there, you want to reframe it in a positive way. Okay. So moving on to the next one. How did you create your own brand as a career coach? Branding was actually a really interesting thing for me. It took me a really long time to get. I'm actually still working on it. If you want to see what my brand looks like, you can go to my website, which I'm sure we'll share. It's just JamelleLindo.com, or go to my LinkedIn. Add me on LinkedIn if you don't have me. I'd love to have you guys on there. So branding is basically, if I were to put it into simple terms, it is how you represent yourself to the world. And you're hearing a lot about digital brand. I love when people talk about branding. One of the best definitions that I heard is your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So when this session is over, right, and you guys are talking amongst yourselves, what are you going to say about Jamelle Lindo, right? Are you going to say, that was terrible, I can't believe I had to sit through that, oh my goodness, I wish that they had another keynote speaker, that would be my brand? Or are you going to say to yourself, that was really insightful, that was really interesting, he kept it interesting, I like the way that he told his stories, and I was able to learn a little bit from it, I gained some insight. That's my brand. It's what you say about me when I'm not in the room. So how do you build that? You build that by building a reputation. How do you build a reputation? Is by providing people with an experience of who you are, and by showing up consistently as that person, right? You can't just be who you are in a very isolated setting, in an isolated event one time. People need to see that reflected over an extended period of time, and then you have a reputation. Once you have a reputation, you can share that. People start to talk about you. They start to know who you are. They start to see your expertise and your brand develops. Your ability to be able to put that forward into social media now becomes your social media brand, your digital brand. All right. Have you ever second guessed yourself when striving towards becoming an entrepreneur? Is second guessing yourself normal? Yes, 100% second guess myself all the time. It is completely a normal part of the process. The question is not whether or not you are going to second guess yourself. The question is, can you still move forward even though you have those doubts? That's the question that you want to ask yourself, right? So can I still take this step even though there's a bunch of unknown, even though I don't know whether or not I'm capable? The second part to that is being humble and identifying with being a learner, not someone who has answers. I'm going to say that again. Identify with being a learner, so someone who is open and willing to accumulate knowledge and information, as opposed to someone who has answers. Because as an entrepreneur, you're never the expert. You're never the expert. And the people who thought they were experts, believe me, right now in this pandemic are saying, we're not the experts. We don't know how to navigate that. The way that you get through that as an entrepreneur is by being humble and being open with the process of learning. And so I have to constantly go back to that learner's view and that learner perspective, which also helps me to not have a big ego and not take myself too seriously and to accept the mistakes that I oftentimes will make. So Jen,
can you see
how many?
your 2-minute warning, Jamelle?
Yeah, that's my 2-minute warning.
I could ask you to wrap it up. And would you be open to receiving the list of questions that students asked? And maybe you could send us the books that you named and any other comments that you wanted to make. Would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Fabulous.
So we'll do one more and then I'll transition and close it off. So does journaling work even if overwhelming starts bordering anxiety, panic attack? Okay, so there's a few things here. We need to be mindful of kind of where you are on that emotional scale, because there is a level at which you do want to seek a different kind of support. Now, emotional intelligence coaching development is very good. It is very, very helpful. But depending on where you are and how extreme your emotional experiences are, it may not be a substitute for something else like counseling or the support of a psychologist or whatever the case may be. So it is also important to be mindful of where you're at, and it's okay if you feel that you're in a state where you need to seek out some form of additional help in that area on an emotional level, because there are other things that could be at play that may be beyond your reach, right? Some of us have dealt with challenging times and trauma and these kinds of things. So emotional intelligence is good to supplement those things, not necessarily replace them. Doesn't mean that you can't start this journey yourself. Just be mindful of where you need the support and make sure that you lean into it. So I believe that that's all that I have the time for now. Jen's going to send me the questions. I'll do the best that I can to get back to you guys on some of these things. If it's pressing, add me on LinkedIn, shoot me the question. You can find me on jamellelindo.com. And I really just enjoyed the opportunity to be able to speak with you guys. And I hope that you found this a valuable experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamelle. So folks, please do feel free to give Jamelle sort of a silent round. So just so folks know, our next session is, sorry, just